All right, I believe we're live. So
Yeah.
good evening, good morning, good midday, whenever you might be watching this or listening to this. It's April 3rd, 2020. So this is episode 2 of our Vodcast. It's video, and we will be publishing this as a podcast on anchor.fm/Oily Cadre. That's OILYCADRE. And wanted to give a quick shout out to some of our local businesses, and Nicholas is going to do that.
Yeah. So I think during this time of quarantine, I think that we're all going through right now, or at least at the time of this recording, we think it's really important to be supporting some of our local businesses. So they didn't ask us to do this, but we're going out of our way to show some of our appreciation. So Roots Fresh Produce Markets in Granbury, we get a lot of our food from there. Organic produce, local farm grown. CJ Butcher Shop also in Granbury, and Zev Martial Arts in Granbury. All of these are small businesses that we feel it's important to support during this time. And if y'all have any small business you would like to shout out, drop it in the comments of wherever you're listening, and we'll make sure to do that next episode.
Yeah, that's awesome. We, like Nicholas said, I just want to say the same thing. We are doing our best to support our local businesses. I know it's really tough for many. Thankfully, the ones that we've mentioned have been able to stay open in one way or another. I know a lot of businesses have had to pivot and do something different, go online in some cases. So we applaud them for trying to continue. So we're just going to get started and talk about some of the latest and greatest news coming out across the country with regards to the COVID-19, and also talk about some other things related to that. Just obviously is the thing that's the most in the forefront of people's minds right now. So it seems appropriate to talk about it some. And I have notes in front of me, so I'll look at them some. But one of the ones that's, I think, really been in the news a lot, obviously, is New York State and New York City, especially. An unfortunate fact that New York City had the greatest number of fatalities today. So it's not a good day for New York. And, the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City have really been asking for help. So, they're calling it literally thinking that D-Day, using that term that D-Day is possibly the day now, because the hospitals are being overwhelmed. And they don't even, not only do they not have enough ventilators and those types of things, they don't actually have enough people, nurses, doctors to help. So Nick, maybe you got something to share.
So I think today we had a little less than 1,000. We had a little over 900 deaths here in the United States, across the country. Those in New York were a large majority of that, but it's cautionary. But I will note that we had less today than we had yesterday. But unfortunately, most experts are saying that that's just a coincidence, and that this should continue to go up over the next 2 weeks. We discussed last episode that the peak is projected to be around April 15th, April 16th. So that we still have a long 2 weeks ahead of us as far as how many fatalities I think we're going to see. But as far as around the world, Italy looks like they're finally starting to drop off as far as new fatalities each day. And fatalities, and cases, So that's good news as far as Italy goes, which means that we'll be able to hopefully see some data coming out of Italy that'll help us as we get further along in our progression of this disease, especially as they start to ease some of the social distancing measures that they're taking there. That'll, I think, help us. Unfortunately, they're ahead of us. So whatever they decide to do, if it works out, then we'll maybe take some of those actions. And if it doesn't, we'll re-examine what we're going to do. So in the sense that we were hit a little bit later, I think that's, for us, is is good, even though we were a little late to respond. We have a little more data than I think they did, and other countries in Europe did when it all started for them. So yeah.
Right. One of the other things, going back to New York, that I read today that's also telling is one in every 6 police officers in New York City is actually sick with what is probably the COVID-19 virus. So I mean, that's putting a strain on law enforcement, and so that's another unfortunate statistic coming out of there. One of the other things that I think is interesting that we talked about some in the last episode, but literally today was announced, and that is a kind of I guess, a progressive thought on wearing masks out in public. So it was very much communicated by CDC and the World Health Organization and others that it was unnecessary, and not only unnecessary, but actually counterproductive for healthy people to wear them. But now that has changed. Both the World Health Organization, CDC, and today the Attorney General, not the Attorney General. What do you call the head?
The Surgeon General. Surgeon General. Yeah.
Little faux pas there, but the Surgeon General announced as well at the White House meeting that they have every day, that we should actually do that. It's optional, but it's actually now, if you're in public, it's highly recommended. It can be anything now. Doesn't have to. Well, the only and then Nick, let's go ahead. The one thing that said is not necessary, and actually they would prefer you not to. And if you have it, to wear one of the N95, because that's actually really necessary for medical staff to use. But handkerchief, any number of things could be used.
Yeah. So we were kind of talking about last time the deal with the mask, and we mentioned a little bit how some of the politicians and even medical experts might be eating their words a little bit now coming. Which is understandable. Of course, we don't have, we talked about the uncertainty of it, especially now that we're getting more deep into our outbreak here in the United States. We're starting to get that data, and I think we're really starting to understand this a little bit more. And so they have taken back their recommendation on the mask. And just a quick correction, I think last time we referred to the loose fitting mask as the N95 mask. It's not N95, like Dad just mentioned, is the mask that the doctors wear, the more tight-fitting ones that fit around the face. But the surgical mask is the one that I think most people would recognize as the one that loops around your ear and then comes around and loose fit on the face. So just a quick correction on that. I think, we're not experts here. So
come on now.
Just wanted to make that quick correction.
We do make a mistake, one or two there every once in a while.
So I just felt to be honest on that. But yeah, as far as the mask goes, I think we will see as we go back into school or work or whatever it may be, we are going to see more people wearing the mask.
One other thing, maybe somewhat related to that, is another thing, and I may butcher his name, so forgive me, but Dr. Anthony Fauci, I guess.
Fauci.
He's obviously been at the forefront of being someone looked to as a key advisor on all this, and he's interesting thing today, and Trump's response was interesting. He is heavily recommending that literally every state, or almost in essence that it come from a federal level, that every state be in a stay-at-home kind of scenario, shelter in place. But interesting enough, President Trump said today in their daily meeting that he actually wanted to still leave that up to the governor of each state. He believed that it was the proper way to govern, and not to do that from a federal level. So the reality is almost most states, there are a few, and I read a few today. Alabama, literally just today, is now, the 40th state or whatever. I think South Dakota, Iowa, and a few others have not made a statewide shelter-in-place announcement. And actually, one other interesting thing about that today is apparently the governor of Texas has been reluctant to all out say the Texas where we live was, but a spokesperson for him today actually acknowledged the fact that I guess technically Texas is under a statewide stay-at-home kind of decree.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. Go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just saying it's interesting to see kind of the progression of who implemented this shelter-in-place orders first. Of course, larger cities did it first, and then it progressed to statewide. And then I think it's interesting to see that maybe some of the more southern states, the more conservative states, were a little bit more reluctant to implement some of those shelter-in-place orders, which I think transitions well into some of the concern that a lot of people have that these shelter-in-place orders are, whether it's unconstitutional in general or just too restrictive. And so places like you mentioned, Alabama, are very concerned that such an order is just fundamentally wrong. But so we can maybe talk about that a little bit and what you think as far as.
Let's talk about it now.
So go ahead.
No, it's a good question. I think we kind of mentioned this in the first episode a little bit, but the question is, and we really want dialogue, at least in the comments. We can't have live dialogue at this point, which would be awesome, but we'd love to hear from you what you think. I mean, I think I'll just speak for myself and let Nicholas share his own thought. I believe that for a period of time, shelter in place makes sense. I don't honestly know how long, and I think sooner rather than later, we do need to return to those that are presumed to be healthy until otherwise proven different. We need to return to something closer to people going out normally and going to work and all the things that they do. But I think that it's unfortunate that we can't across the board just expect that people will do what's sensible and what's reasonable and what they should assume is a general moral obligation to care about people other than themselves. So I've always, in our household, always talked about, balance is normally the answer, not far to one direction or the other. So
I think that's true. I think it's interesting because you have this situation where people are perfectly happy, I think in the majority of cases, to self-isolate and choose to stay at home, which I think the majority of people are doing before their states issued this shelter in place. I know, especially in Texas, plenty of people were already staying at home, not going out, as much as possible. And then passed down from the state or even county level governments was these shelter in place orders. And then that's when people started to have a problem with it. And it's funny because as soon as someone tells you can't, then it becomes an issue. But
that's true.
I think for the most part, people are already pretty happy to do it. I think most would consider their moral, like you suggested, moral obligation, because it's not necessarily even about you or your family. It could be, but it's also about the people that are more vulnerable with those underlying medical conditions that us as a society are protecting by staying at home, even though a good majority of us maybe aren't at risk of serious complications from this disease.
Well, I think, Nicholas, if I can share, I think one of the things that's related to this and this thought about returning to the new normal, at least whatever that is again, when we talk about balance, the reality is if we're all staying at home, we're not out, buying food at a restaurant. We're not getting haircuts. We're not getting our nails done or all those kind of things. I don't get my nails done, but nonetheless, there are people that get their nails done, pedicures, all those things. And I'm not saying that's more important, but the reality is all of those things combined is what makes our economy turn. And it's not, and it's not just about the economy, but there's something to be said. And me and Nicholas have talked about this a little bit. Nick, this may be something we want to talk about next, is the reality that if our economy continues to stall, then there's like this ripple effect where it, as it causes poverty and other things, then you have other medical issues that come up and crime increases. So it's,
for sure.
what I don't want people to think is that we're insensitive to the fact that, okay, when we go back out there, we're going to expose people. But the reality is there's underlying important reasons why we do need to get back into some kind of normalcy at some point sooner rather than later, or we'll have other issues that are just as critical.
Yeah, for sure. I think just some quick numbers. As of right now, 10 million people have been unemployed or have lost their jobs because of this, and 6 million have applied for unemployment. And we talked a little bit briefly in our first episode about the stimulus bill and how it was relatively quick that it passed through. And unfortunately, I think some of the issues that's going to happen going forward is, even though that's there and available or supposed to be available, or I think a lot of people might have trouble accessing the funds that they're supposed to be getting from this. We, can be optimistic, and I think we're optimistic about this, but I think as that's starting to roll out, it's, small businesses that are reaching out to get these loans are having really hard time. And I think going forward, we're just going to have to figure out a way to speed this up and get those funds to the people. And also, I think as just consumers, we're going to have to figure out a way to support business in general, because like we mentioned, you can have, we're saving lives now, absolutely, by staying at home like we are. But as you mentioned, if 20 million people go unemployed because of this, that's 20 million lives and even more than that, because, if there's one of those 20 million is the provider for 3 people in their household, then, that's 20 million times 4 people, so that's 80 million people that don't have a source of income for food and, the rent and electricity.
Right.
So we're having.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I just think, like we discussed, you can't ignore the fact that this disease is, taking lives, and we have to be conscious of that right now. But I think, like you said, going forward, we're going to have to figure out a way to get back into the economy. Otherwise, lives are going to be lost just from the fact that so many people are going to be unemployed. Like, we're going to have one of the highest unemployment rates, I think, in the history of the United States.
Right. And so I was going to say to that staggering number, I think it's already in the double digits, I believe. And they're estimating, if things kind of go the way they are, upwards of 20, like 23, 25, possibly as high as 30% unemployment, which is just
that's crazy. Ridiculous. Yeah. That's insane.
And so, possibly 50 million people out of a job, now hopefully, just a lot to think about, somewhat related to that, maybe we can talk about a little bit. Nicholas just mentioned today, Friday, April 3rd, was the first day that I guess people could really start applying for the loans and the various different things that this bill was passed to be able to, and already like $3.5 billion has actually been loaned out. So there are people figuring out how to do it. The other thing I'll say, which I can say in a positive way, in some of the circles that I'm in and some of the companies that I'm aware of that are primarily geared towards online businesses and, for creators, whether that's musicians or photographers, guys that do video or have digital products, maybe it's training or coaching. Some of these companies are, putting together funds to actually, get money to be able to help those. And then one other thing that they're doing, which is really cool, is offering in some cases free access to software. I know a lot of you have probably heard of Zoom. Surely now, if you haven't heard of Zoom, you've probably heard about them. They've increased their user base by 300%, which is crazy. And that kind of explains why that platform has been exposed some for some of the security issues, but they're working on those, from what I understand, really hard. But one of the things really that I wanted to mention about some of these companies, and I've seen several emails come through today where they're offering basically free resources to help people navigate all of what Nicholas was talking about, whether that's a small business loan. Some of these you definitely have to pay back. Some of them you may not have to pay back depending on what it's for. So there's a lot involved in that. And I think, to Nicholas's point, I got to believe there's a lot of people that don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, sure.
What to do. So,
yeah. And I think you make a good point that some companies are most definitely seeing an increase. So we kind of talked about the conspiracy theories that people are spreading about COVID-19. And I think if anyone's spreading conspiracy theories, then, it's Zoom.
Right. Yeah.
Just, as a joke, it's some of these companies, Zoom and Microsoft Teams. These online streaming and connection services are definitely seeing a major increase, which, as you mentioned, is posing some security problems for large businesses or important industries like defense or like Boeing and stuff like that are having their communications within their teams over these services, which maybe it's crazy because some of these companies they don't have any other options right now, which just seems crazy that multi-billion-dollar companies are having to use a video conferencing program that I use to, do my English class for school right now. Right. So it's just a lot of these, telecommunications problems that we're going to have to end up solving.
Right. Well, another interesting note, and again, it's not in this particular case, not a good one, but it is telling in one sense of it's just like, or I'm going to try to make an analogy that I actually believe is true. I've heard people that I respect talk about money. In other words, someone that didn't have a lot of money and now they do. Money doesn't typically change you. It just exposes who you really are, right? In other words, if you're a big giver and always gave with what little you had, then when you have much more, you're going to give much more. The same goes for the situation now. So in other words, what I mean by that is people are going to either use this as an opportunity to basically take advantage, or they're going to use an opportunity to truly reach out and help. And what I mean by that is companies, and so where I was leading with that is literally I read today that one company fired 400 people through Zoom. And it was
wow.
Yeah, it was a 90 second or less. I heard that it was pre-recorded. Now they're actually denying that it was pre-recorded. I don't know the truth, but what I do know is true. Regardless of whether it was pre-recorded or live, it was very, very short. And it was basically to say, we're letting you go. Now, I'm not suggesting that the company didn't need to do that step of letting them go, but by all means, with the time that those executives probably have on their hands now, they should have done the courtesy of calling those people individually or sending them an email and leaving their cell phone number and saying, there's something we need to discuss. But
that's
to lay
crazy.
400 people off from a Zoom, that's really a bad statement.
Yeah. So I think transitioning a little bit off of economics and maybe even a little more into politics, let's talk about history for a second. So
religion will be next, right after politics.
Yeah, exactly. Economics, politics, religion, the three most controversial things. So we're getting right into it. So I think
a good show.
Yeah. So historically speaking, you look at events, like the Great Depression or even 9/11. You have these circumstances where there's this vast nationwide effect that occurs. With the Great Depression, it's obviously economic, and 9/11 it was military, and then became social with some of the measures that were taken. So I'm just curious what you think maybe on the fact that a lot of times some of these crises are used as a stepping stone for maybe some more progressive ideas, which, good or bad necessarily. I think there's a trade-off, because we talked about this a little bit in our first episode, but security versus privacy.
Right.
So like 9/11, we all decided as a people that we were going to trade a big chunk of our privacy for, security, because, before 9/11, you didn't have TSA officers patting you down or anything like that. Obviously, I wasn't around to remember that, but I'm sure you were. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I've traveled a fair amount, and I guess interestingly enough, I certainly remember 9/11. I was actually down in Houston. We live in the Fort Worth area, but I was working on a project in Houston when it happened. And so, of course, I rented a car and drove back home. And for several months, honestly, because of the hassle of traveling through airline, since I had the option and it was fairly close, I actually drove instead. But, the new norm there, like Nicholas mentioned, is TSA. And, now I have TSA pre, and the reality is now it's funny in one sense, but it's, I guess, the law of averages and that type of thing. I now pay $80. Many of you might have TSA free $80 for a 5-year period. And now I go through security just like it was prior for the most part. And so, we do give up. I'm, for the most part, okay with, I guess, how that has ultimately turned out. What I don't like, honestly, and then we'll get off of TSA necessarily, but I think it's relevant, is the inconsistency as well, right, of how that works. It's very inconsistent depending on where you travel. They have, I would argue, too much latitude with regards to interpreting what's okay and what's not, all that type of stuff. And that is just indicative, I think, honestly, of something that's run by the government. I mean, it may be necessary that it's run by the government, but I think we all know that there's built-in inefficiencies a lot of times when the government is running. Go ahead.
I think you're right, because a lot of the times, you could go, and the amount of travel that I've done, you can walk up to one TSA officer, they won't, take a second glance and wave you on through, and then others, you'll, have to go and they'll swab your playing card deck. I mean, I've traveled with playing cards. I just do, and I have a deck of playing cards in my bag, and they'll swab it and think it's a bomb, and then they look at you like, what's going on with these? I'm like, it's a deck of playing cards. And so, it's fine that I go through that, and of course I understand that they're trying to protect us, but I think you did mention a good point when you talk about consistency is strange. So I guess a question I have for you, just as someone who's kind of gone through that sort of thing before with a huge shift in national attitude towards something, how do you see that translating to what we're experiencing now? Like, what do you think? Because you had the new norm after something like 9/11, or even the Great Depression, with stuff like, that was in like the New Deal and the work projects and stuff like that. What do you think coming out of this type of thing we're going to see as, the defining new normal?
Well, maybe I can answer the question initially like this. I think you really alluded to this, Nicholas, and that is both good and bad from a political perspective. Let's say for a minute, certainly, and we'll just use two general camps right now, although there's nuances to that. But let's say conservative and liberal, although there's stuff in between. Obviously, both conservatives are going to use this time, I think, to push some agendas that they have with regards to probably, being less dependent on foreign imports, that type of thing. They would probably be the ones more pushing that. Now, the liberals, again, I'm generalizing some, but there will also be, maybe even without using labels, there will be political factions that will push for universal basic income. I can guarantee you that. Pushing for some type of, insurance reform where it's free, maybe, or very inexpensive. I wouldn't be surprised if we see another push for, in essence, free college for everyone, or a certain subset of our citizenry. So I think. And then the one other one that I will mention, which I'm very much related to, and I think we alluded to this in the first episode, and I've certainly seen this in corporate America, so I don't think it'll be any different typically once you lose a privilege, I'll use privilege when I'm talking about corporate America. When you lose your free lunch, every day that you're in. I actually used to work for a company that had free lunch, and it was great. But the reason it went away was the economy was bad. But do you think that it came back when the economy was better than ever before, and they were actually making money and the second largest software company in the world? No, it didn't return. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Neither did the free insurance, which they could certainly after that economic downturn came and went, and they were actually more successful than ever before. That didn't return. So now, let's apply that, and then I want to hear what you have to say.
No, you just have to be vigilant, I think, because if you value a certain thing, whatever it may be, if you value a right or a privilege that you have, and it starts to get taken away, you just have to be vigilant in the fact that when it comes back into a time where that's viable again, that you have to be on top of things to where you say, hey, wait, we sacrificed this in this moment to, save lives like we are now. Like, if the government came back and said, actually, you know what, curfew every day, 1 a.m. you have to be back at your house, that's not going to fly. You just have to, be careful of things like that. And of course, it's not going to be that crazy. But if you have places like California that are trying to shut down, gun shops right now, whatever you think about that, you have to be vigilant.
Can I just
sure.
on that one briefly, more so because I was literally thinking, we didn't talk about this prior to getting on the show here, but as Nicholas was talking, that was one of the things I was thinking about. And let's talk about that one briefly for a moment. That's the gun shop thing. And I want to say, at least from my perspective, I'm very much a proponent of the Second Amendment. I'm very much, and I very much believe that the Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting. It has everything to do with being able to protect yourself and those that you love and your country and all those kind of things. And I think the real issue, although sometimes, our conservative friends, I would argue, don't present things the right way so that it's maybe taken the right way, but the whole deal with closing down gun shops and not considering them essential is the fundamental essential of still being able to protect yourself, right?
Sure.
So if let's say you're a new gun owner, or maybe you don't have a firearm yet, and let's say this thing progresses to the point we're talking about 30, 60, 90 days stay at home, crime will increase. So it should be considered essential because people should have the ability to acquire things that they're constitutionally able to acquire to protect themselves. That's
especially when unfortunately, right now, I don't understand, maybe to some extent, why, other than the fact that I guess it's a crowded area, but a lot of places are releasing prisoners, which in some cases it's nonviolent offenders, but at the same time, it's what do you expect, sometimes. So it's interesting because you see one of the industries that hasn't been suffering right now is the gun industry. So
they're definitely, I mean, there are lines, I don't remember which state or where it was, but there was, a line probably 2 blocks long. Now, I mean, if they're still doing their best to maintain social, that's a hard word to say, social distancing and all that type of thing. I mean, again, the reality is some people are going in there out of fear. I mean, I personally have what I believe is enough firearms. I mean, I would like to have the right to go buy another one if I want. The other thing that's really interesting, Nicholas, about what you just mentioned, you may or may not know about this, but one of the guys that I follow kind of satire on this in one sense, but believe that the mayor of Houston basically pleaded with the criminals out there to just stop criminal activity until the virus is over. That's literally almost what he said. I mean, let that sink in for a moment. That a public official, someone that's responsible to actually run the police force, if you will, the one over the police force, is saying, "Hey, criminal, we're almost legitimizing the fact that you're a criminal, but just hold off for a while until the virus is gone, and then you can go back to your normal activity, and then we'll put you in jail.
Even though our law enforcement is at 3/4 capacity right now, even though we don't have as many officers out on the streets than anyways, I find it funny. Although I feel like maybe home invasions are going to go down.
No, that's
everyone's at home.
They at least in states like Texas, they will.
Yeah.
I mean, here's another interesting thing. Not good again, but something I heard, Nicholas. I don't know if you've heard about this, but unfortunately, there's been an increase in people impersonating police officers and having people pull over, and they're either just harassing them or literally trying to steal from them. So I mean, yeah, it's the criminal element will always find a way to take advantage of anything. It's just like the flood that came. What was that?
Harvey.
Way back in the day, and Texas had its share of that. Louisiana, lots of criminal element, and they're always going to be there. So again, all the more reason why we should be able to, those that choose to, at least that want to be able to protect themselves and their family. So
yeah, sure. It's all a lot of concerns that come with the time like this when things are so uncertain. It just breeds a lot of chaos sometimes. Let's go back. We again mentioned it with the TSA, but the discussion of security versus privacy. Because I think we talked about at some point the deal with Microsoft and Bill Gates and the vaccination.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that. We didn't talk about it much at all, but what about it? Yeah.
Well, just in general, I think for those of you that don't, for the people that don't know what is that? What am I talking about?
So from what I understand about it, and it's I think pretty much out in the open, so I don't think this is any kind of a quote unquote conspiracy theory. I think it's a reality, and I'll tell you before I even tell you what it is. I'm certainly opposed to it, but it's my understanding that Bill Gates is working with a number of other pharmaceuticals and other technology companies to basically put, in essence, a microchip into the virus so that they could track it. And I'm like, they obviously would like us to believe that they put in all the fail safes so none of that information could fall into the wrong hands, and some of that information would not even be retrievable. But I think that's just one step too far. I don't trust that. Even if I could trust Bill Gates, I don't trust. We have some pretty smart people in this world, and I believe someone would figure out a way to use that. And what I do know is, you go a step further and you go to a place like in China, and you know that they would completely exploit something like that. So what if they get it? Then that means that their people in their country are even subject to more intelligence gathering.
Yeah. So I think in one sense, you have the sense of safety that comes with knowing who all is vaccinated for this virus, so that you can manage what population is in certain areas. So I guess the discussion becomes, how do we mitigate the risk of spread when we all go back to work, and at the same time maintain some sort of level of freedom of, individual rights? Because if an employer says you have to get this vaccine to come back to work, at that point, what do you do?
Right. So can I fundamentally make one more I guess comment, or
sure, go ahead.
It'll be a telling of what I think personally, and then we'll jump right into what you're talking about. I think it's just like, and I know this gets very personal, but it's just like, I won't even name it particularly, but there are certain things that if someone or some organization supports that, then they're immediately discounted as far as I'm concerned. It's one of the ones that I'm thinking about. I'm not going to talk about because it's just really too deep, honestly. But why I say that is because it's related to the fact that there are certain things that you just have to say, I don't care how great it sounds, it's too much of a problem with potentially losing your liberty. So in other words, with liberty, comes certain calamity at times. It's just the reality of it. And we believe that from the beginning of our nation, and I don't want to be all I don't mind being patriotic. I don't want people to think that, I'm trying to be some radical, but the reality is a certain thing we just have to live with. I mean, it's just like, we have to live with the fact that in order to be able to protect ourselves and have that right, there are going to be people, unfortunately, abuse it. And, as unfortunate as is, it's more important that we maintain our liberties. So, I would say about that.
So I'm curious what, as we do transition into something like this, I think if you have the choice to do something along those lines, I think historically, a lot of people have chosen to take, whether it's security or just simply convenience over privacy, because I think with cell phones, cell phones is the prime example of that, because I think we all know, at least to some extent know that, when you're using your cell phone in general, you have, it's unprecedented as far as the access to information and ease of communication and all these benefits that come with it. But at the same time, I think the majority of us know that at some level, our information, our internets, search histories, and our preferences online are being stored and sent to, these businesses and companies. But I think we all decide to either just not think about it and accept the convenience that comes with it, or in a lot of cases, just don't care. And
can I mention another thing on that before we move beyond it? It gets a little technical, but it's there is hope, and you'll know what I mean by that in just a second. But to further, talk about Nicholas's point, Facebook, just for example, I won't mention any other. The average person, they have 400,000 data points on.
Yeah,
but we accept that. I don't know that the average person knows that they have that much, but the average person certainly knows that they know a lot about them. And to me, exactly the point is that people, given the convenience, and not only the convenience, but the pleasure, honestly, that they get in using that platform, they're willing to accept the breach, if you will, or the invasion into their privacy, and them knowing things that 20, 30 years ago, someone would never imagine someone knowing about them, and in some cases, it's almost like the frog in the kettle, a frog in a kettle that's just the heat getting turned up slow by slow by slow. They'll boil and they don't even know it until it's too late. I know that's pretty graphic in one sense, but why I mentioned that there's hope, I'm also kind of involved in online marketing. It's just one of the things that interest me. And we are entering into a phase, I guess, in that aspect of the world where actually they're getting rid of, in many cases, what's called a cookie. I don't know how many of you listening to this or watching this know what a cookie is, but a cookie is, something that's basically captured from your browsing and any number of activities where companies can now know all that. That's how Facebook gets all the information they have on you. That's how Google gets all of what they get on you. That's how when you have visited a website and you go to Facebook and you're like, how in the world am I now getting an ad that's related to it? Well, it's that way. But they're turning advertising on its head, because they're going to be getting rid of a lot of these third-party cookies. It's being mandated in a sense. So some of your privacy will return. Now, what the next thing will look like, I don't know all of that. But my point is we do, I think, go through cycles where in some cases, some things do get better with regards to that. But I do think, generally speaking, it's only going to, for the masses at least, they're going to be willing to, they're going to want their convenience more than they're going to want their privacy. So that makes it really difficult for those of us that may want less being known about us.
Yeah. So
people have gone so far, and then Nick, I want to hear what you got. Some people have gone so far as to opt out. I mean, in essence, to just not have that stuff. But that's pretty hard.
Right. You make a really good point in the sense that, as we progress down this line of convenience or ease of, whatever it is in our daily lives, um, we get to the point where if the majority decides that they're willing to sacrifice privacy for convenience or security or whatever it may be, those who don't want to make that sacrifice become marginalized. And then what you end up seeing is it just becomes harder and harder to, even if it isn't mandatory, maybe you're put at a significant disadvantage. Because I mean, if you decide, hey, I'm not going to use a cell phone because I feel like it's an invasion of my privacy with the data they collect on me,
Yeah.
how do you function in this world? Like,
Or
legitimately.
trying to only operate with cash. I mean,
Right. Exactly.
don't get me wrong. I don't think that's even a bad thing to do, but it's almost literally impossible if you travel, for example, and want to rent a car. About the closest you could do is they don't even most hotels and rental cars won't even accept a debit card. So I mean, it would be very, very hard. You'd almost have to, I don't know, you have to be very intentional. For example, if you do any kind of travel or do much of anything, you would not be able to buy anything online. I'm not saying it's impossible to do, but it significantly limits what you would be able to do in this world compared to the 50 other people around you.
Sure. So if you decide that you want to maintain those certain liberties, then you're maybe put at a significant disadvantage within society. And this almost gets into a discussion that's a little more philosophical, which is, of course, the old adage that, ignorance is bliss. So like if you have all that convenience and you don't understand that you're losing the level of privacy that you are, at that point, does it even become an issue to you?
So this is like the Matrix, right? That you're kind of talking about.
Well, yeah, it's a bit of a hypothetical, but for a majority of people, you could even say that they don't understand that, and that's not to say that people are dumb or ignorant, but that in a way they are ignorant to the fact that they're being controlled in the way that they are through their cell phone. But
Well, you know what's interesting about that, Nick, and I'm sorry if I cut you off, so please think or try to maintain your thought process. So the interesting thing about that is I completely agree that a large portion, sorry, my nose is itching. A large portion of society, I think, likes to just not know because it makes it easier, honestly.
It makes it easier to accept.
It makes it easier to accept, but the reality is so much of that information is available. It's not like someone that knows that it's easy to find out that Facebook has 400,000 data points on you. All you have to do is instead of binging on Netflix is go do a little Google search. And I'm halfway joking, but my point is you can find out a lot about what you care about or want to know. So if you're ignorant about it, it's perfect. It's fine, I guess, that you're ignorant, but you're not ignorant because the information's not available. You're ignorant because you've chosen not to go gather the information that's there.
Which I think on some sort of level you can't blame you can't blame them in some circumstances because, when something becomes such a big part of how we live today, you might argue that it is better to not know because I don't think anyone who does know has decided, at least the majority of us haven't said, okay, I'm giving up my cell phone. And
let's be real too. Some people use that knowledge just to rant all the time. Let's be honest, right? So in other words, some people use the knowledge. Well, I don't think we're actually ranting. And one of the things that me and Nicholas talked about is I'm like, if we rant any, then we need to bring it back and actually try to add some reasonable and valuable commentary towards it, because I don't have any problem with ranting, but what I do have a problem with, and I used to be that guy, honestly, and hopefully I've changed for the better, where it was mostly ranting, if you will. But you can find plenty of bad, and there are some things that it would be better if they didn't exist in this society. But one of the other things I'd like to bring out in this, video and podcast is what I want to encourage people to do, what I want to encourage myself to do, my son, my family, everyone I know, is during this time, and even when this time has come and gone, is to be a positive impact in this world, certainly have knowledge, certainly know what you're up against, if you will, in this world. But, the reality is we can do something about it, even if it's something small. So the point is also, I think what Nicholas is saying, maybe without saying it, or it certainly is actually off of that, is the fact that it can be overwhelming, right? To have the knowledge
For
of
sure.
what can be known about us, the knowledge of all these kind of things could honestly, for some people, bring them to despair. So it depends to a certain extent on how you're wired with regards to whether you can, whether you want to know that or not. And I guess it's actually okay if you know that knowing that kind of stuff is just literally going to keep you depressed 90% of the time, then by all means, just keep your head in the sand, But if you can handle it, then I would encourage you to become a little bit more informed so that you can, possibly do something about it in the right way, in a constructive way, in a balanced way. So.
I think that's pretty good advice, because I think for plenty of people, they can find themselves in a position where knowing something just decreases, just in general, the quality of, their daily lives. Because if you know that there's this big looming situation around you that, is such a big part of your life, which again, I'm going back to this, but with your cell phone, if you know that the thing that you use every single day for tons of different things is just this thing that's, spying on you, quote unquote, and that might be such a burden on you that you can't go through your day without thinking about it. So I think it is important to acknowledge that for some people, it maybe is just best to, not think about it.
Sure. Well, and talking about cell phone, and this one is debatable in the sense that most things that are debatable, it's because in some cases there is little information about it. But what I'm about to say is, with this 5G coming out and all over the place, there's a number of people, and I don't personally know enough to legitimize it or not, but if it's legitimate, then there's certainly reason for concern. But with the 5G, just the electronic emissions or whatever it puts out, there's a lot of people heavily concerned. But here's the reality, right? This is where it really hits home, is at some point 5G is going to be so ubiquitous and so everywhere that, honestly, whether you're using your phone or not, you're still going to be around all that stuff. So it's going to be a real decision that people are going to have to make. And so my question for people, I'm not saying don't be concerned about it, and I'm not saying don't push for it. I think the ship has already sailed with regards to 5G coming in. So my question is, what do we do about it? I know this is getting really specific, but do we wear some kind of metal thing around our head and never use a cell phone anymore? I don't know the answer. I'm really curious. If anyone's watching this or listening to this, I would like to hear some real suggestions on what we do other than stop it, because go ahead and say stop it, but I don't know that that's going to happen.
Yeah. And as far as something along the lines of dealing with the problems that come with innovation, because you weigh, the risk versus the benefit in anything that you do. I think as a society, we have to do that. And if we don't, then the trend line of quality of life for us as a population could end up going in the wrong direction, because obviously you want that to be a positive trend line. And sometimes as you innovate something, it goes, it goes up, and then as a result it goes down, but the net is benefit. So I think with something like 5G, with something like 5G that's so revolutionary as far as how it's going to be able to connect devices and things at a much more rapid rate, it's something that we're going to have to say, is that more beneficial than the possible health impacts that it's going to have with that type of transmission going around us 24/7.
Sure. So let's talk about that a little bit more from a philosophical perspective, Nicholas, because I'm curious. Yeah. So I think you bring up a good point, which is to say, let's ask a super philosophical question, which is to say, generally speaking, have we progressed enough in society that if we never had faster internet, do we really need something like a 5G now? And I'll wait just a second to answer, but as a person that loves technology, I love the idea of what 5G will do. Just tremendous. But at the same time, it's also going to, like any innovation or earth-shattering technology like that's also going to only heighten the ability of companies and governments and individuals to know even more about us quicker, faster, with more density, all that. But yeah, go ahead, Nick. What do you think? I mean, do we really need 5G, or
I think it's a really interesting question, because I think humans as a species, we just have an innate desire to innovate and keep going, even if something's good enough, because I think technology is good enough right now. There's nothing, in my life where I'm like, man, this isn't good enough. Like, I wish,
right.
So, I mean, there are things that could be better, sure. And I think we're always going to push for better.
Right.
But as far as, I don't think humans are ever going to lay down and be like, all right, it's good enough. We're just stopping it. We're just going to stop innovating. Because at that, I mean, and if you think about it, even that would be, I think, detrimental, to be honest, to the development of humans, because how many people are in the business of innovation? I mean, I think if we stop innovating, even if something's marginal, like, making the 8K TV, even though 4K is almost undetectable by human eye, but we still have.
Why do you need stinking 4K? Right. I said that with HD. So, I mean, all these things, let's be real though, all these things are more, and I'm not saying other things aren't, they're entertainment in a sense, related, those are, but what about, to your point, we certainly have not innovated enough, and probably never will, on the forefront of medicine, for example, right? Medical stuff. I'm sure that when the caveman, chiseled out a wheel, right, from a rock, and they're like, okay, what would we ever need other than this wheel, right?
Yeah, so, exactly.
And the other point I'm going to make, and then Nicholas, I want you to continue with your thoughts, is that you made such a good point that I would not have thought of as we were having this conversation, but I also believe that it's a God-given thing that we want to create, that we want to innovate, that we want to improve. That started, I'm sure, in the Garden of Eden, and has been something that God created in us. I mean, because we're here not just to be. We're not here just to be present. We're here to be more than just someone, eating and going to sleep. So
yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting because you don't see other, you don't really see that in anything else. But I think it's interesting because humans as a species, has been just an absolute positive trend line in the quality of, I think, our existence. And I think as that goes on, we're getting maybe marginal gains, between, iPhone 10 and iPhone 11 and then iPhone 12, and then all of a sudden you see some quantum leap in technology. So I think
it's going to be.
Sure, yeah. Exactly. So even though maybe for the past 5 years, cell phones have all been the same, in 5 more years, there will be some, major change. And I think
you'll be able to type in the air.
I think we're starting to see that with folding technology, folding screens and things along those lines, but it's always a push. And I think as far as innovation goes, I think it's also what just drives the economy in general, because you have how many dollars are in the American economy because the population wants the next iPhone. I mean, even though it's marginally better.
You talk about a transition there, right? I mean, I can say for myself, I used to literally wait every 2 years. I would get, in essence, a free phone, right? And I was happy with that. But now, this whole industry has transitioned to where you can still wait, but in essence, you're paying for your phone over time. Although you could pay it all up front, it's now, in essence, not free. It really, in many in many ways used to be free, or you used to have to pay $200, right, for the next phone, and you got it. And these companies honestly are smart, right? I mean, you think about software now, and I know we're getting again very particular, but you rent most software now. You used to own software. You rent most music now. I mean, and these things go in cycles. People will eventually maybe say, "Hey, I don't like the fact that I don't own my music, and if I stop paying Spotify or Apple or whoever else I use, I don't have my music anymore. I've got 100 CDs. Other may have hundreds of old LPs. Something to be said about physically owning something, but this is another one of those convenience things because I jumped on the bandwagon. I'll be honest. When people in my household here were like, hey, I'd like to listen to, or people, for example, were talking about how they loved Hamilton, the play, and then there was a soundtrack, and I'm like, well, now with Apple Music, I can just type it in, download it, and
exactly. Bam. And listen to it right there. You're exactly right. It's a convenience thing because when maybe you're sacrificing a certain thing, you're always getting something else. That's it's a pretty basic concept that you're trade-off. So I think we're seeing as we move along a trade for convenience. Almost always we're giving something up for more convenience, more ease, and maybe that's not bad. I love Apple Music. Apple Music is amazing.
I love it. I mean, I love it and I hate it at the same time. I'll be honest, right? And it's some of that's a generational thing. And going back to what I said, I mean, again, this is being very specific. I used to love the fact that I had a CD, I could burn it, I could put it in MP3 as a backup, all the things. I mean, even iTunes has changed considerably. I used to could have the same iTunes download on multiple computers. Again, these companies learn how to maximize, if you will, a lot of these things. And I don't necessarily, that's the consumer's fault in the sense that they don't like that, right? I mean, it's if people like it, that is the direction that it's going. So I love Apple Music.
It's things are driven by what people decide. Now, I mean, you can talk about, companies pushing a certain thing and that sort of thing, but at the end of the day, we buy it and that's what they do because we buy it and they know that we'll buy it. So on some level, we're responsible for if we see a trend, again, talking about trend lines, a trend going a certain direction we don't like as consumers in a generally capitalist and free market economy, we're responsible to shift that trend in the direction we want.
Right. To your point, you can vote, as they say, you can vote with your pocketbook, but let's be real again. And I like the thought and the concept, but be ready to be alone. I mean, that's just the reality. You can certainly vote with your pocketbook, and there's nothing wrong with just saying, I want to opt out because philosophically, I don't like the thought, and I certainly would not be one to say that's a bad approach. Just unfortunately, don't expect that you'll have a lot of people following behind you because, again, and we probably beat it to death, but convenience rules the day in many ways. Again, it's like we went and watched Aladdin and I actually liked the movie. And now, I'm like, okay, so go to Apple Music, download it, and now, Mila, my youngest daughter, loves to listen to that. Even Zoe, my older daughter, just likes a lot of the songs from that. Now, I would otherwise traditionally have to, prior to Apple, I'd have to wait for it to be released and maybe either go buy the CD or download it from Amazon. At least if you buy music on Amazon, honestly, you do still have options. If you were to buy music on Amazon, again, it's a convenience thing with Apple Music. It's different. I can go buy the MP3. You can still buy CDs for that matter. And I can still do it the old way. Now, in some cases, you don't have those options. But anyway, it's definitely changing. And can I, Nicholas, I want to say one other thing before we maybe wrap up. I want to, I want to mention a couple of links. I think given the time that we're in, and I think we've kind of already talked about this some, and maybe we end with this as well, the fact that we haven't talked about this, Nick, and I think we'll end the show with this after I give the links. That is the fact that I think there's going to be, me and Nicholas talked about this before we started the show. I think there's going to be a shift in the way both business works the way education works, the way generally our life is transacted because of what we are going through with this virus and what it's causing us to do as far as staying home, working remote, all those kind of things. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But 2 links that I want to share with you that are relevant. If you're interested in, we love free in this household. This tool that we're using right now, for example, we're going live on Facebook. It's being recorded. We'll then put it on YouTube, put it out on Anchor FM, which is our podcast. All that stuff's free. This application we're using is free, so we love free. And I'm going to give you a link to a free tool that would allow you to create landing pages and also have the ability to maintain an email list to be able to send out if you have an online business or maybe you want to start one. And I would encourage you, given where we're at right now, as a backup potentially to what you might have done traditionally. And so these links are STRAML, that's STRAML.com/LEM. Now, what that link is, that's going to take you to a link where you can register for a Zoom call that I'm going to do, which will tell you how to use a free tool called ConvertKit to create landing pages where someone could come to that page, sign up for a class that you're going to do, sign up to find out about a product that you're going to be releasing, whatever. And then that same ConvertKit tool, which is free up to 1,000 subscribers, will also allow you to send out those email messages. So that's the first one. You go to that website, you can sign up, get the free tool, sign up for, I'm waiting for enough people to be interested. There's already 21 people in there to do a Zoom call, totally free. And then the other one is straml.com/audible. So these are affiliate links. I'll be honest, I get a small portion. If you ultimately buy something, these are both free offers. But if you decide to, with Audible, for example, to go beyond the free trial, I would get a small portion of that, very small, but you wouldn't pay anything extra. Now with the Audible, I love Audible as well. We're talking about convenience again. Audible, for those who don't know, you probably do know, but that's basically books on audio, and many of them I like are unabridged, which means the full book is basically read, and you get, with that free trial, it's 30 days, and you get 2 free books, and it's awesome. I mean, I love Audible. I still love physical books. I like Kindle as well, but I'm old school. I like it all. I like being able to listen to something, and then I like to have the book if I can. So those are the 2 links. Now let's talk about, Nicholas, maybe we're already at 1 hour and 7. You're either interested now in what we talking about, or you've already tuned us out anyway, so we'll go a little bit longer. We were talking before the show about how things will potentially change forever, right? So Nick, you maybe share some of your thoughts about how it's going to potentially change education, because that was one of the things we were talking about.
Okay, yeah. So right now, as you know, as a student, I'm in high school, finishing out my senior year. I'm 100% online right now. Our school has been shut down, I think, for 3 weeks.
What's going on?
So we're using Google Classroom. We're doing Zoom calls online, assignments through websites and different educational resources. And I think something I found, at least for certain courses that are a little less maybe hands-on, like, you know, maybe your English class or your math class and stuff like that, online has been a format where it doesn't seem to affect it too much. Like with, you know, I have the ability to still listen to my instructors through Zoom and these online resources, and it's really efficient. I've been able to get a lot of my work done in a lot less time. I mean, if I think about how much time I'm at school, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's 40 hours. And I can tell you for a fact, yeah, I have not put 40 hours in to my schoolwork, which maybe the worst.
I'm joking. Go ahead.
I think, and it's not even necessarily just that there's not as much work. It's just, it's a lot more efficient when it's right there and you can do it at your own pace and watch it when you have the time to, because it's spread out, over the day, but it's not as exhausting either.
Right. So I want to help the discussion a little bit. So I think get to where you think it's going, and then I want to ask the question of, or let's talk about the reality in a minute that you may be one that can learn on your own better, right, with less interaction potentially. So I know where you're headed with the conclusion. We need to then talk about, well, what about the people that are not wired quite like you, right? So we need to talk about that.
I think what I was getting at is that, at least for me, like you mentioned, it has proven to be a little more efficient, and I think that's the case for some people, a majority of people. But like you said, there are definitely people who this has been a struggle for. I know some people that's the case for. But I think as we continue to move on, I think people are going to realize that for at least a fair amount of people, online schooling is a very viable option that is going to end up, I think, in the long run, increasing massively. I think.
So let me ask a pointed question. That's a good point, I think. So do you think that, let's talk about in the context of public school for a moment at least, okay? Because this is what I'm thinking in my mind as I'm listening to you. Do you think it's a viable or an appropriate adaptation, if you will, as we emerge from this, to maybe offer, even within the public school context, remote education for some, and those that prefer and or honestly, because of the way they're wired, need more FaceTime, real FaceTime, that type of stuff, where it could almost in a sense be optional? What do you think?
I think for sure. I think you're going to be able to have more students per teacher. I think that's the reality. And as far as from a purely economic sense, yeah, you might not like to hear it, but I think you can educate with public education more students for less money. So I think it's going to transition into a phase where maybe you have students in person, but you're going to have 100+ students per teacher, and that teacher will maybe have an aide that helps them with grading, but you're going to be able to educate the general population much more efficiently as far as monetarily, and also faster, I think,
right,
as well.
So how do you determine which students get to do it remotely, if you will, and which ones, is it purely optional? Is it based upon their maybe, because I'll tell you what happens in the corporate world in one sense, and then I want to hear your response to that. So, because this is something that's very close to me as a consultant in supply chain. So it's kind of interesting that obviously supply chains have been hit hard in this with this virus. So it's something I'm very close to. But our clients traditionally would like for us to be there. It's just the way that people traditionally work. They want us to be physical, want us to be present, but the way that we normally get some latitude with being able to work remote is to, when we are with them, is to show that we're actually not only productive there when we're with them, that we're equally or more productive when we're not there physically. And I think it's a direct translation. And again, maybe people don't want to hear it, but let's talk about how, and I'm not saying school's not the real world, but you hear the comment of the real world. And so once you get out of school and into the quote unquote working world, I won't say real world, but the post high school, post college world where you're working, the reality is it's a combination of value and productivity and just people being stuck in their ways, being traditional. And I'm going to get lost in all the things that are coming up in my mind, because that's a big struggle right now, which is the fact that traditional managers are struggling right now because they're used to seeing their people. They're used to being able to know, at least visually, that they look busy. And that's the key, honestly, is that they look busy. A lot of us are visual. And so they're struggling right now. And literally actually micromanaging now that their people are remote, calling sometimes every 15 minutes or texting them, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And they're actually, what they don't realize is they're actually eroding away at an opportunity for people to actually be even more productive. And I think studies by and large prove that the leadership and management doesn't like it so much, but productivity honestly goes up. So now let's translate that to education and continue.
So in terms of schooling, I think what you're going to maybe end up seeing in the long run, over some course of time, and maybe this is the catalyst that makes people start to think about it in some sense, through this time of online school for the majority of people. Everyone I know has been in an online format for at least a week or two. So maybe this is the event that's going to make people start to think, hey, maybe this is viable on a long-term basis, in the sense that you can have a lot more students, maybe at even one school, because what you might end up seeing is 3 out of the 5 days of the week you have online instruction, and then one half of the student population goes to the school for 2 days, and then the other half of the population goes for the other 2 days. So you have the socialization and also maybe some of the hands-on instruction that you need, but it's in a much less, it's a much smaller amount of time that you're physically at a school building with an instructor that's right in front of you for certain things as band or other stuff.
Right. And so why shouldn't efficiency and improvement be the goal versus staying traditional just because it's traditional, right? In other words, there's nothing wrong necessarily with tradition, but just like we were talking about with technology, why can't we at least have a dialogue, right, about innovating in education and any number of other things? We're just talking about education right now because it's a real thing. It's something that's been drastically, at least temporarily, changed because it's all from the home. And you can always think about positives of everything. I mean, if people are doing more of that from home, if they're able to be successful at it, right? And that would be one of the criteria that I think we just go ahead and pull out, just like the business thing. If you can prove that you're successful at being educated at home, even in a public context or under the heading of a public school, then why should anyone want to discourage that? And then Nicholas was talking about so as long as you have the socialization aspect of it, which people need, and if you're improving the efficiency, that's less time that people are on the road. Any number of things you could look at that, less car accidents, potentially any number of things, right? So in other words, I would encourage educators, administrators, parents, students to have a real dialogue about this and say, hey, is there something that we have learned during this unfortunate time that we could use to come out of this thing with something better than what we had?
Yeah, so I'm curious if there's any teachers or even students listening on whatever platform. Leave in the comments what your thoughts on some sort of maybe even a hybrid system where it's online and mixed with in-person education. I'm very curious as to what certain people think, because I think you made a good point. As long as we maintain some sort of choice in the matter, I think that's fine, because right now you see plenty of people that are choosing whether it's homeschooling or, they're online schooling programs for high schools or K through 12 even out there, but it's a private industry most of the time where people are choosing that's what they want to choose. So I think as long as there's some sort of option and market out there for different people to choose how they want to be educated, then it's perfectly fine. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is that as far as public education, it's always geared towards some person. Like you're always going to have people in public education that would benefit from, maybe the function of a private school where the classes are smaller or they have more one-on-one with an instructor. But what you see is that you always have some sort of marginalized population. So if school starts to move towards an online scenario because it's more efficient, it's easier to run. And of course, that's, not always, but a driving factor for a lot of things, maybe in government when you're talking about taxpayer dollars. I think that's an important thing to look at. So you're going to end up with a certain marginalized population that would prefer in-person 5 days a week. And there's going to be maybe a choice out there, but you might have to pay for it.
Well, right. And to your point, and again, two things that I want to point out. This is great, honestly. I'm loving this conversation. I think 2 points, and you brought up one of them about the how would you structure this? Because you have buildings that obviously still have to be heated, all those kind of things, and that gets into tax dollars. So what I'm going to ask as another kind of criteria, if folks don't mind for a moment, answering that question that Nicholas asked, completely initially disregarding what that would mean with regards to how do you keep the building open, all that. Think only for a moment, because that's what we should do, honestly. Think only for a moment about the student and diversity, or the ability to better help the whole student body with regards to being able to cater. Because as Nicholas is talking about this, I'm like, okay, yeah, amazing in one sense. If we thought about this, it would be different for every school district. But if you arguably wouldn't need that second building that you're going to build for $20 million, or whatever it is, because if you keep your, we wouldn't know until it was experimented with. But if there was a larger portion of people that wanted to be schooled at home, still under some type of a public school oversight, in a sense,
Sure.
but wanted to do that from home, their parents were okay with it, all that, and they proved that they would be successful at it. And then there were people that wanted it in person. And then if hopefully that number kind of would work out right, where you necessarily wouldn't have the growth that's necessary from a physical perspective. And so don't think about all that until after you've answered the fundamental question, which is, do you even think that concept is viable or beneficial to the student? Start with the student and then work out. I mean, I don't think that you can address this issue properly if you don't start there, because obviously there's a lot of other things that you got to think through. How do you make it fair from a tax perspective? For example, not going to answer it here, but okay, let's say that Nicholas, all my kids want to do home school under a public school oversight, whatever. Should I still, I'm not giving the answer, but should I still pay the same taxes? Should I pay something less because they're not coming to the building, they're not using any of those facilities? Or should I pay it all because I'm part of the collective? I'm not answering that for you, but obviously we got to think about that stuff.
Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting topic, because there are, when you're working in out, which I think is a really good way to look at it, as you get farther out there, and this is the case with everything, there does seem to be some complications with this, because while it's more efficient, that means you're cutting somewhere, which unfortunately what that might end up being is cutting teachers and certain, people that make their livelihood off of the education system.
Or maybe, and we're not answering it, but it's very possible that it may actually not, it could, but it may not cut teachers, because maybe they're teaching more people. In other words, maybe the school district widens, right? And maybe honestly, two school districts merge. I'm just throwing this out there. Not maybe Lipan and Bluffdale and Toller come together as one school district, and none of the teachers are needed to let go, because they're still all needed. And then they're teaching a bunch of other kids that don't want to come to school. I have no idea, but it's possible, Yeah,
it's just a really interesting conversation.
You make a really good point. We have to. It's just like, and I hope it doesn't come over as insensitive. Well, before I even say that, I'll say I have, even in my own work, had to adapt from day one. There's never been a day in my whole career that I haven't had to learn more, learn something new, shift what I'm doing, prepare, hopefully to look ahead, prepare for what's coming so that I'm still relevant, all those kind of things. And without making it personal, don't think any job, so period, any job should be immune from that. I mean, that's the way the world turns. And so I'll use another practical example. It's just like with, we could talk for hours, and this is something else we'll talk about one time as technology. This is actually one of my passions. Technology, like it or not, is going to massively displace people. It's going to replace accountants. I mean, I hate to say that, but it is. Corporations that have a accounting staff of 20 is going to go down to one that works 20 hours a week instead of 60 because of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And those all sound like we've been talking about those for years, and we have. They're at a level of maturity that's not science fiction. So I guess the point is as much as we care about people's jobs, we do. It's in the forefront of our minds, given the fact that we just talked at the outset of this that 10 million people have lost their job, 50 million maybe before it's all over. So it's not lost on me, and we care about it. But again, I hope that we can be innovative. And the thing is, with that displacement, my hope with that even as well is that people are willing to adapt and find other types of jobs. These technologies are going to replace that job. They're not going to necessarily replace jobs, but in the sense of the total aggregate, people are going to have to be willing to do new things. And I'll say I'm at 54. Trust me, I would like to just be able to say I don't have to learn anything more unless I want to learn it, right? I think all of us maybe get to that point where we're like, I'm tired of having to learn something to keep my job. I would much rather learn what I'm interested in. Trust me, I'm there. But if I want to continue to be employable, and especially in the line of work I do, I have to stay on top of it. So
I think it's a good point. And, as in my experience with the teachers and, even the students adapting, it's been, and we talked about this again with some of the businesses around adapting. Everyone, it's encouraging because it seems like everyone is understanding that point, that at this moment, and even moving forward, like we were talking about, into what might become the new norm, people I think are doing a really good job of that. So, yeah.
Well, we're coming up on an hour and 30 minutes. So I guess we'll kind of start wrapping it up, and we'll be done here in an hour and 30. So any parting thoughts, Nicholas, that you have? Or
I just want to remind people who are listening, remember to comment in the comments a small business that you would like to shout out in the next episode, and
give
we'll
us
do
your
that.
website if you want to as well. Tell us in the comments. Tell us your website or your Facebook, handle or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. This has been a good talk. I'm glad we got to do this.
Yeah, so I guess my kind of parting words is really just restating what I stated earlier. My encouragement is to, try to, and I want to take my own advice, and that is to just try to find ways to encourage people. There's no doubt that the media, generally speaking, I think we all think that probably some of this is sensationalized. Not so much so that the opposite of that is true, that it's not a thing at all. I mean, hopefully we've all come to the realization that this is a real thing that we're facing, and people really are, dying from this, and we should be concerned about that. But let's try to find ways to encourage, to hopefully help people that are in fear, to help them, deal with their fear, and to just help people. And the last thing I was going to say, talking about the comments, would love for you, if you're listening to this or talking to this, and we're going to formalize this eventually. We'll have an actual name for our video. We're going to create a YouTube channel that's dedicated to this. We'll come up with a name eventually, those kind of things. We're piggybacking on some things that I kind of already had out there, and so be patient with us on that. But in the comments, let us know what you'd like to hear about. I'm not suggesting that we have a handle on everything going out there, but the other thing I think me and Nicholas both love, I'm the elder at that, and he's the younger at that, but I think we're both very interested in things that are going on in this world, and have some shared interest and some unique interest as well, or some interests that we don't share, but together they, maybe have enough breadth that there's some things that you're interested in that we can talk about. And if we don't know about it, we'll go research it and at least share with you kind of the conclusions that we've come to. And we would love for this to be more of a dialogue than a monologue. And the only way we can have it to be that right now is add comments. We'll eventually have a email address where you can send us email. I think we're kind of actually first. Now we're doing one on the third. It's like, I think we're like getting to the point where we're like, okay, when are we going to do the next one? So we'll come up with a schedule of some sort, whether it's once a week, whatever. So appreciate everyone. The one we did on the first, on Facebook at least, I think almost 200 people have watched it. So if you're watching this one, thank you for watching that one. If it's the first one you've watched, we'll put in the notes and on this Facebook where you can go to the other one. And thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Everyone stay safe.
Bye, guys.
All right. Bye.